Morning. On behalf of New York Law School and Dean Anthony Crowell, I welcome you to the 179th City Law Breakfast. I'm Ross Sandler, Professor of Law and Director of the Center for New York City Law. Thank you for attending and for helping to make City Law Breakfast such an important public forum. They all began in 1994 and we're still going strong. I want to thank our three generous and loyal founding sponsors of the City Law Breakfast series. They are Consolidated Edison, Verizon, and the law firm of Greenberg Traurig. They've been with us from the beginning, and we are very grateful to their support. I also want to thank each of you who have made a voluntary contribution when you signed up to attend the breakfast. Your name will be prominently listed on the email sent after every breakfast with the link to the video. And if we were all together in the event center, you'd get a gold star on your name tag. We are enormously grateful for your voluntary contributions. You have helped make City Law Breakfast possible. After Mark Levine's prepared remarks today, we will have a question and comment session. You may submit a question or a comment at any time during the breakfast. We will collect the questions and comments as they come in, and we encourage you to do so. To submit a question or comment, please use the Q&A function on your Zoom screen. Please identify yourself with your first and last name and your organization. That will be helpful for everyone. Following the questions and comments, Matt Gawab, Associate Dean of New York Law School and formerly Legislative Counsel to the Council, will join us for a conversation with Borough President Levine. We are delighted to welcome Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine to our City Law Breakfast series. Mark Levine was born in Chicago and grew up in Columbia, Maryland. He majored in physics at Haverford College and at the University of Seville in Spain. He later earned a master's degree in public policy from the Kennedy School at Harvard College. Levine joined Teach for America and from 1991 to 1993 taught bilingual math and science at Junior High School 149 in the South Bronx. Levine won a city council seat in 2014, where he distinguished himself as a leader on health issues and as a lead sponsor of the right to counsel legislation that provides free counsel for low-income tenants facing eviction. Mark Levine is fluent in both Hebrew and Spanish. That combination has not been seen in New York since Mayor LaGuardia, who was fluent in both Yiddish and Italian. Levine's career has been marked by his interests in science and his beliefs in social activism. In a December 2021 interview with The Forward, Levine said that his belief in science and his social activism came from his late father, Marshall, who was a physician, and from his mother, Adele, who marched with Martin Luther King Jr. in Selma in 1965. Referring to his work on the Council Health Committee during the COVID pandemic, Levine said that those two value streams, science and social activism, have really come together for me over these past 2 years.
Manhattan and the deep inequality, which has been revealed and exacerbated over the past 2+ years. You see it in the COVID data quite painfully. To give you but one example, the fatality rate from COVID in East Harlem is 5 times what it is in Tribeca. And you see that playing out across almost every policy area throughout the city right now. Manhattan has faced a uniquely difficult economic shock in this crisis because we lost tourism, which we depend on. We lost in-person office work, which we depend on. For much of the past 2 years, we've lost in-person live entertainment that's thankfully starting to come back. And our job growth still lags the rest of the city and country, even at this late date. We've had the horrible crisis in homelessness and mental health that's playing out on our streets. And of course, the desperate and growing shortage of affordable housing, which underlies those crises. We've had the outbreak of Asian hate, which has hit Manhattan particularly hard. We've had elevated numbers of other categories of hate crimes, including anti-Semitic incidents. Manhattan, according to last week's annual ADL audit, Manhattan leads the state in the number of anti-Semitic incidents, I'm sorry to say. So we have challenges on many fronts, And we've been using the tools of my office as Manhattan Borough President to take on those challenges in many ways. First, starting with the public health arena, which I remain deeply committed to, even though I'm no longer chair of the City Council Health Committee. From the moment I took office in January 1st of this year, we were in the midst of an unimaginably intense COVID wave. We were seeing 50,000 cases a day. It's hard to believe those numbers. And so we have just been intensely focused on smart public health policy to push this virus back. We formed a COVID recovery task force comprised of experts in public health and medical care, but also experts in the sectors that are being impacted by the virus: business, education, restaurants, technology, and more. And we put forward a plan that we've called Stay Healthy to Stay Open, which calls for the kinds of investments and resources and attention that we need to give families the capacity to protect themselves now. And I'll say more about that in a minute. But I want to acknowledge that we have come a very long way since early January, but that we are also in the midst of another wave. Incredibly, this is our fifth COVID wave. We are seeing cases rise again rapidly. Manhattan has led this wave. Actually, Manhattan specifically, south of 96th Street has led this wave, particularly young people who have returned to socializing and who have lower rates of boosters. But it's now really citywide at this point and increasingly national. Thankfully, while we're seeing the level of hospitalizations increase, it is nowhere near the levels that we saw in January. And that's because we have tools that we didn't have even 2 or 3 months ago. For the first time in the pandemic, testing is far more plentiful. In fact, there's really not a shortage even of self-test anymore for the first time. For the first time in the pandemic, we have a really adequate supply of antiviral treatments like Paxlovid, which get incredible results. And that's just been a game change for our ability to prevent the most serious disease and illness. But let's not kid ourselves. The impact of this wave is real. We're already seeing businesses under strain because so many employees are out of work with COVID. Particularly, we're seeing that in the restaurant sector. And this wave is still growing because of a variant which is ultra contagious. The variant we saw in Omicron, many experts call the most contagious virus they'd ever seen. And the current subvariant is at least 50% more transmissible than what we saw back in January. So the risk is real. And it's why we are continuing to push the city to do more, to invest in the resources, to have the strong messaging, and frankly, just the attention that we feel that this ongoing challenge requires. Starting with a renewed focus on boosters, we are way behind. The city is only we're at less than 38% of people in the city have had their booster shot, a number which has barely moved over the last 3 months or 4 months. And so we're calling for a citywide campaign to begin to restore an increase in booster rates, to encourage people to get out and take that important step. We're not confronting anti-vaxxers in this work. Over 90% of adults in the city have gotten their first shots, but there are over 3.5 million people in New York City who completed their first vaccine series, but have simply not gotten their booster. We can reach them. Mostly when you talk to them, they'll say that they just haven't gotten around to it, that they feel that the threat is no longer serious. We need to first encourage them by doing things like bringing back the $100 bonus, which was canceled in February. We need to go directly to them. We've actually called for a program to just schedule appointments for all of them and mail them a postcard so they can get a time slot in their neighborhood. For many, that will be the nudge they need. We want to make sure that every family in the city has the resources at their home they need to protect themselves. Still, at this date, many don't. We want to have every family receive what we call a COVID safety bag, which will contain self-tests, high-quality masks, pulse oximeter, digital thermometer, information about how to access antiviral treatments. Every family should have that. Many don't still. We've done what we can out of my office to we've acquired resources to distribute thousands of these COVID safety bags in neighborhoods like Harlem and Chinatown and Marble Hill. But to go big citywide, of course, we need the full force of city government behind us. We want every building to make high quality masks available, just like they provide you soap and toilet paper. It should be standard equipment. It's still far too difficult to get high quality masks at this late date. We want better data on the spread of this disease, including by allowing people to report the results of self-tests. You still can't do that in New York City. And so the official numbers that I just cited and that are reported daily probably represent 1/5 of the actual number of cases, but we don't actually know that for sure. I've now concluded, and I can say this for the first time today, that we need to restore our isolation hotel program. You know, during Omicron, if you got sick and needed to protect the other members of your household, you could relocate to a hotel provided by the city. That program was canceled back in March when we were in something of a lull. I've now determined we need to bring that back because of the number of cases that we're seeing every day and the number of people who have vulnerable members in their household. And I actually want to announce today that we are beginning a major push that I think will be critical to protecting us long-term from this virus, from future waves, and similar transmissible diseases, which is we want to have high standards on air quality in buildings in New York City, something that we simply don't have now, that we've never really adequately addressed. We're preparing legislation that we hope will make this analogous to fire safety provisions, but of course focused on things like airflow and filtration in public buildings, commercial buildings, even residential buildings, not just standards for new construction, but we hope also standards that would apply to existing buildings. We believe that this will be one of the most important ways we can protect ourselves going forward. This is the kind of thing that has emerged out of other pandemics. We largely got large windows that could open because of fears about tuberculosis. We need a similar rethinking of the physical environment now coming out of COVID. Of course, we've been working on issues on a variety of fronts beyond public health. One of which that I have to mention because I'm speaking to a room of attorneys is what I consider to be a mounting catastrophe in New York City's housing courts, where the number of eviction cases is so great because of the combined backlog that accumulated during the eviction moratorium. Of course, that moratorium has now been lifted, and the steady stream of new cases that is coming in. It all adds up to being enough to completely overwhelm the tenant legal service providers. And there are tenants who are going without representation right now. I want to remind you that this city did something really big in 2017. We passed legislation. In fact, Matt Gawal was central in that effort when he was back at the city council. Legislation that I was pleased to co-author with my then colleague in the council and now fellow borough president, in this case in the Bronx, Vanessa Gibson. Legislation that made us the first place in America to establish right to counsel for tenants facing eviction. This is a movement that's now gone nationwide. Many other jurisdictions have replicated this legislation. There's actually a movement in Congress to go national, a movement in Albany to go statewide. And it's just been a game change for tenants here, leading to a dramatic drop in the eviction rate with an incredibly high success rate. 86% of the tenants who had representation in the program were able to remain in their home. But that right to counsel for tenants facing eviction is not being fulfilled today in housing court. In 4 of the 5 boroughs, Manhattan, Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens, tenant legal service providers have announced that they can no longer take every tenant that's coming in because of the sheer flow of cases and the fact that their staff and systems are overwhelmed. There are families who are going to lose their home and who will end up homeless because the right to counsel is not being fulfilled for them. Now, long term, We need to increase the budget we're allocating to these services. It's one of my top priorities that I'm fighting for in the city's budget negotiations, which are ongoing right now. But in the short term, actually, money won't solve the problem because, as you will know, because you're in this profession, the process of recruiting and hiring and onboarding and training attorneys will take the better part of a year. And frankly, there's a shortage in this sector like there is across the economy. The only solution today is that the Office of Court Administration has to slow down the calendaring of eviction cases so that no case moves forward if the tenant does not have an attorney. We have joined with a broad coalition of activists and leaders to demand this. So far, unfortunately, there's been no movement. And so this crisis builds, and we're continuing to fight for the courts to use the powers that we firmly believe they have to address this crisis by slowing down the calendaring of cases. Of course, the challenges of housing are beyond preventing evictions. It is dealing with the chronic shortage we have of affordable housing overall and finding innovative ways to create more affordable housing. And this crisis actually presents an opportunity to do that in ways that we didn't foresee even a few years ago. Because of the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, we've had vacancy in Midtown office buildings due to changes in the nature of office work. After all, we're doing this forum via Zoom right now. There is an opportunity, I believe, in some of the older buildings that are less desirable to new tenants to convert them to housing. This is what we did in downtown Manhattan after 9/11 with enormous success. And it's something we can do in Midtown to create new housing. One thing that's got to be different than what we did in Lower Manhattan is it can't all be market rate. It's got to be affordable. And the cities and the state are going to have to step up to make that possible by regulatory accommodation and also financing assistance to make that possible. But nonetheless, a huge opportunity to address the affordable housing crisis by taking advantage of one of the biggest challenges we're facing right now. Of course, there are many reasons for the slow pace of return to office work, one of which is challenges in mass transit. You can't have an office building fill up if you don't have good mass transit. And we're really focused on this issue and focused on transportation challenges more broadly as we head into what some have called the carpocalypse. I don't think that is hyperbole because we've already seen a return to the level of car and automobile congestion in New York City that is equivalent to pre-pandemic, even though office occupancy is less than 40%. In fact, truck traffic has now exceeded pre-pandemic. I believe we're up to 110% on truck traffic relative to pre-pandemic. Extrapolate forward as the economy comes back, we are headed for a catastrophe that will impact our economic vitality, our environment, our air quality, our public health, safety on the streets. We need to implement congestion pricing amongst other measures to help alleviate that. We are still mired in a bureaucratic process to make that happen. We're probably realistically looking at 2024 before implementation of this critical program. But we're working very, very hard now in my office to make sure that it happens and that it happens right. We have demanded that the Traffic Mobility Review Board, which is the entity charged with defining the policies for this program, that it have at least one representative from Manhattan. And we have convened our own task force, comprised of experts on this topic, to begin to work through the many, many policy details that we've got to get right to make this work. This is, of course, ultimately in part an environmental issue because we've got to get people out of their cars for reasons of climate and resiliency and air quality. And we have focused on a policy which touches all of that in partnering with all 5 of my borough presidents. We're not all in the same party, but Vanessa Gibson in the Bronx Antonio Reynoso in Brooklyn, Donovan Richards in Queens, and yes, Vito Fosello in Staten Island, we have united to call for the planting of 1 million more trees in New York City, building on a very successful effort that took place in the Bloomberg administration a decade ago. That will be a win for climate because of trees absorb CO2, a win for resiliency because trees absorb storm runoff in flood events, and because they can cool a neighborhood during heat waves that are ever more common. This is a matter of equity because there are far fewer street trees in low-income Black and brown communities, including Upper Manhattan, than there are in wealthier and whiter areas. And so we've called for 1 million more trees on the street, and street trees filling in vacant street pits and digging new ones, more trees in parks, in our natural areas, and in more innovative places like in school properties, NYCHA campuses, even rooftops. I firmly believe that we can do this and that we will. This is really a part of our thinking about the public realm more broadly. We're thinking about every aspect of the public realm in Manhattan. And in that respect, we have launched a legislative effort with my colleague in the City Council, Rita Joseph, to remedy the longstanding problem that in Manhattan and New York City, there are far too few public bathrooms available. This is actually a major issue that I consider to be a public health problem, a human rights problem, I would say an equity problem as well. And we have submitted legislation now introduced in this council that would require that there be at least one public bathroom available in every zip code in New York City. And the city has a solution here that's just waiting to be implemented. If you've been by Madison Square Park, you've seen that on the sidewalk, there's a self-contained public bathroom there. This is the kind of thing you see all over the world in major urban capitals all over the world. We're way behind on this. It's working in New York City in places like Union Square. And in fact, the city has a couple of dozen of these self-contained units that have been sitting in a warehouse for more than a decade. And so we just got to cut through the bureaucratic red tape. We got to get this done. Our bill would help make that possible. Finally, I want to talk about our work on behalf of small businesses, which are struggling now to recover after a difficult 2 years, and we need to help them on many fronts to cut through the fines and fees which burden them, to help get them legal assistance when they are in disputes with their landlords for lease renewal or other matters, and most importantly, to get them access to capital, which many of them have difficulty obtaining from mainstream financial institutions like banks. So to do something about this, we have launched a $2 million loan fund in partnership with the Hebrew Free Loan Society, which makes loans of up to $50,000 available, zero interest to small businesses in Manhattan. So if you have a favorite small business that you think needs help to restore working capital after these difficult 2 years, to buy new equipment, to launch a marketing campaign, to expand it in any ways, please have them reach out. We're calling them our Booster Loans program. And as we're talking, I just got a text, a little bit of late breaking news here, that we have, I can now say that we have just sent a letter to the MTA. This is back to our transportation topic, that I and a number of my colleagues in the City Council of Manhattan have authored that addresses the workhorse of mass transit, which is buses, which are underappreciated, but serve a ridership which compared to the subways is more low income, higher proportion of people of color, more likely to be people with disabilities. And so we're really working to improve bus service. And we just sent out a letter in the past few minutes, which is demanding that the MTA allow for all-door boarding. You know that there are Omni readers at every entrance of every bus, back doors and middle doors for longer buses. They're not currently activated, but they're waiting to be turned on. Studies show, and the experience in other cities show, that all-door boarding will dramatically increase the time it takes for buses to board passengers and move on to the next stop. And so we're calling for that to be implemented here in New York City. It turns out that currently the MTA is going in the wrong direction. They're actually now limiting or they've given a policy change that bus drivers are not even supposed to open the back doors unless someone pushes the back door button. So we want to fix this by allowing for all door boarding as one of the smart strategies that that we believe will help improve mass transit and get people out of their cars as we come back as a city. And as I said before, I believe we are coming back. Restaurants are now at 75% of pre-pandemic booking levels. Hotels actually are doing even better than that, approaching 85% of pre-pandemic booking. Mass transit, while still has a long way to go, we're now seeing over 3 million riders a day, which is about 60% of ridership relative to pre-pandemic. We've come a long way since spring of 2020, when we were down to only about 10% of ridership. Most of the Broadway houses are now back. Bookings are really strong on Broadway. Housing, both in the rental and sales market, is reaching astronomical pricing. Now, that is only exacerbating the affordability price crisis, but it's also a marker of the belief that New Yorkers have in the long-term prospects of the city. I don't want to minimize the challenges that still remain when we're only seeing office occupancy of 37%, when we continue to be saddled with deep inequality along lines of race and income and so much else in every arena, from housing to health to criminal justice to education. And I've mentioned repeatedly the crisis in affordable housing, which is, I would argue, more acute now than ever because of the increase in housing costs in market rate units. And of course, then we have the existential challenge of climate change, which is already here. We are, after all, a small island on the coast of the Atlantic, and we need audacious policy to address this. But I have to say that I am absolutely confident that we will come back, that Manhattan and New York City will continue to be a magnet for people, as we always have been, to come live here, to work here, to travel here, to play here, to see a show here. I am confident that if we do the hard work that we must, that we will come roaring back, not as exactly the same Manhattan and New York City that we were pre-pandemic. Frankly, there was a lot that was wrong with 2019 in this city. I want us to come back as a stronger, fairer, safer, more just, healthier Manhattan and New York City. And I am using every tool at my disposal to fight to make that happen. So I'm going to pause there and turn it back to you guys, Professor Sandler, for your questions. I'm really excited to dialogue with you now. Thrilled to have a chance to chat with you about the future of our borough and city. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much also for a very full rundown of things that are really important to all of us in the city. Before I go to the questions, I want to thank Lillian Valle Santiago of the staff of the center and Brian Kasuba of the staff of the center for all they do to make these breakfasts possible, and then also the staff of the law school, the IT people and everyone else who make these possible. Before I turn it over to Brian, let me ask one question. You spoke about congestion pricing. Could you be a little more specific about why you think it's going to take to 2024, and what should we be doing to accelerate that? It's such an important aspect of what we need to do for the city.
Well, there's just been delay after delay after delay. Some of it, I guess, can be attributed to the pandemic. Some of it can be attributed to, I would argue, political cowardice. And it's just time to get this done. It's complicated, and we have a long way to go. The body charged with determining the policies, things like the price that you'll pay, the congestion charge, things like will there be a differential between peak and off-peak, et cetera. questions like, will certain groups be exempted or get a discount? None of that's been decided. And it's the traffic mobility panel, which has been charged with determining that. It has not even been constituted yet. There's also the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure installation has not begun. That's extremely complicated. And so I think a realistic assessment is probably it's not going to be turned on by 2024. You asked what you can do. We need political pressure to get this done. This is going to be very controversial. There are people who are not going to be happy about congestion pricing, and they're going to fight with everything they have to ensure that it is delayed. So if you believe in this policy as a way to both reduce congestion in the central business district, but also to generate a steady stream of revenue for mass transit, revenue that will be about $1.5 billion a year, that will have a transformative effect on the infrastructure of mass transit. If you believe in those goals, then please use your voice to push for this thing to happen.
Good. Thank you for your leadership on that. Now let's turn it over to Brian and to the questions that have come in.
Thank you, Ross, and thank you, Borough President, for a great presentation. So we have a good number of questions in the queue. We'll try to get to as many as we can. The first question is from Richard Jordan, former president of the Concerned Citizens Speak, who lived next to the Brotherhood Synagogue for many years. His question is, with your science background, how will you be promoting International Day for Women and Girls in Science, which is February 11th annually? And can you speak to the issue of equal pay for equal work done by men and women scientists doing the same job?
And who is this question from again? I'm sorry.
Richard Jordan.
Who you said lives near a synagogue?
Yes, the Brotherhood Synagogue.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. There's so many friends there. Wonderful institution, a model for social activism. I firmly believe that there's not a shortage of talent in New York City, but it just breaks my heart that so much of the hiring that tech firms, that life science firms, and that really the growing science employment sector here in New York City, so much of the hiring is being done by bringing people here from elsewhere who are not graduates of New York City public schools. To me, that's an indictment on the school system. We have to do much, much more to give young people, beginning in pre-K through 12th grade, particularly girls and young women, the tools they need to succeed in these careers. We should be teaching coding, computer programming, to every kid in every grade. I mean, there's curriculum even for preschool that teaches some of the elements of algorithms that can be used as a basis for coding. We have a long, long way to go to achieve that. And, frankly, over the last couple of decades, science education has atrophied some in the schools because of the emphasis on the two core standardized testing materials, which are math, which is important, and reading. But science, believe it or not, I believe has gotten short shrift. And as for pay equity, this remains a problem even in progressive New York City. And I am proud that the city council has taken a number of steps through legislation to remedy this, including far greater reporting requirements within city government on salaries broken down by race and gender and other factors, which has exposed some of this inequality, and a new law which is just going into effect that requires employers to post the salary ranges for jobs that they're posting, a law which is already in effect, which prohibits employers from asking about salary history as part of the hiring process. These have all been determined to be existing barriers to pay equity for women. And so New York City is making progress, but has a long, long way to go. So thank you for this question.
Great. Our next question is from Philip Tungendrach from ET Partners LLC. Are you willing to reconsider the plan to build 4 new jails as a means to the closing of Rikers Island?
Well, Philip, First of all, not sure if you've been to Rikers. I have more than once. It's a human rights disaster. It really should shame all of us. The conditions that are there are just unacceptable, and they remain so today. All of us should be focused on this, and it's why I strongly believe that Rikers should be closed. There are a variety of far better uses we can make for that island, for green infrastructure, among other benefits. And yes, a system of borough-based jails has a variety of benefits in creating smaller, more humane, more modern facilities that are near courts, that are near communities. There's no doubt that the intervening years since that plan was announced, I think, require us to re-examine some aspects of the plan. I'm focused mostly on the Manhattan piece of it because that's what I represent. And I think that as the cost has risen, as New York City's finances have become tighter, and it's because the criminal justice landscape has changed some in recent years, I do think that a reconsideration of the plan has probably been in order. And I've been in dialogue with some of my colleagues for alternatives at the Chinatown site that would still achieve the kind of modern facility that we need there. But that dialogue is ongoing, and it doesn't shake my overall belief of the problem at Rikers and our need to close that facility.
Great. Our next question is from Ronald Nicholson. It's a bit of a long one. Under state law, the Water Board has the authority to pursue safety net hospitals in New York City for delinquent water and sewer charges using a 2-year statute of limitations rather than a 6-year one set by the Public Service Commission that does not regulate the Water Board. The city has repeatedly opposed the effort to change the law in Albany and has promised to resolve questionable water bills on a case-by-case basis, but has failed to do so. Safety new hospitals and other not-for-profits serve populations which have suffered greatly during the pandemic. What can be done to make the Department of Environmental Protection have to comply with the same billing practice that regulates utilities?
My goodness, what a well-informed, detailed, and interesting question, a topic about which I know very little. And so all I can do is say that I would love to dialogue with you about this, and would love for you to help my office get up to speed. And if you could reach out to us, I don't know if I put contact information in the chat, if you'll see it, but I'd be happy to. Would love to talk with you offline about this and see how we can be helpful. So thank you for that question and for alerting me to this issue.
I have a question myself, Mr. President. So I'm a father of a 3-year-old and an 8-month-old. You talked a little about, encouraging vaccinations. Children under 5 are not yet eligible to be vaccinated. There's been talk that should hopefully be available soon. Could people in the public sector and local elected officials do more to put pressure on those at the federal level, the CDC and the FDA, to push that these vaccinations become available so that these children who are not yet able to be vaccinated can do so soon as things are opening up and they're being more exposed to COVID?
Yes, it's just incredibly frustrating, the slow pace of rollout for vaccinations in the under 5 cohort. We need to we need to push hard. This is definitely not under my jurisdiction. This is a federal matter, but I remain extremely frustrated and want us to push as hard as possible to allow vaccination for the younger age group.
Next question is from Allison Morpurgo. She's an attorney with UBS, but here in her personal capacity as an Upper West Sider and New Yorker. Her firm and others have pro bono force eager to be more active to help New Yorkers. They work with the City Borough Justice Center currently in order to answer this call for support. what other organizations would you recommend for private sector attorneys to who may be inexperienced in landlord-tenant matters but are willing to help?
Well, first of all, thank you for this question, because there's a dire shortage of attorneys doing work on behalf of tenants in housing court. I think I mentioned earlier that even what the providers have told us is that even if they had more money today, it wouldn't immediately solve the problem, because there's just not enough people who are coming forward to do the work. So to the extent that there are law students watching, I might imagine there's some. Boy, will I encourage you to think about this as a career track. It is just a way to have such an impact. I can't think of anything more meaningful than helping a family stay in their home. So to young people, we need you in this sector, and to established attorneys who are willing to help, we need you as well. I feel a little bit weird about recommending specific nonprofits. There are many, about a dozen or so of the major legal aid providers. They're all my friends. I think New York Law School knows all of them. So I feel a little bit weird about recommending one over the other, but there are dozens of nonprofits doing this work. If you want to reach out to me directly, I guess I can talk you through what I see as the different strengths and weaknesses of the various entities. But I don't think any of them are turning away help. So get into the arena and do what you can. We really need you now more than ever.
And for those asking questions, again, we'll try to get to as many as we can, and any that we do not get to, we will share your questions and contact information with the borough president and his team, that they potentially follow up with you afterwards. So please keep the questions coming, even if you don't think we'll get to yours. Next question is for James, from James Parrott. Is it your understanding that the state's Penn Station area redevelopment proposal includes large tax breaks for developers of high-rise office buildings? If so, do you support that financial plan? Do you think the proposal should be changed?
I'm assuming this is the James Parrott, in which case I better be careful that I answer this question smartly. Let me start by saying that I believe that the status quo at Penn Station is just unacceptable. I mean, this is the largest transit hub in the Western Hemisphere, and it's just disgraceful what we subject commuters and travelers to. What's taking shape at Farley and the new Moynihan station shows what's possible, but that's really only serving, I don't know, probably 5 or 10% of the passengers a day. The broader usage is in Long Island Railroad and New Jersey Transit, and of course the subway, which are all served by Penn Station proper, which is just a warren of dark and inhospitable passageways. We have to fix it. And it's not going to be cheap to do it. And we also need to expand track capacity there, because thanks to a project to expand tunnel capacity under the Hudson, a project known as Gateway, we're going to have more trains coming in. And so we need more tracks at the station to allow for boarding and on and off boarding, which itself is another extremely expensive project, probably more than $10 billion. We've got to fund this, and my feeling is we want as little development as necessary in order to secure the funding. The prospect that the previous and now the current governor has put forward is development rights in exchange for payments by developers that would help fund this renovation work. We got to make sure that, there are a lot of outstanding questions on this. First, we don't really know the deal that the city's being offered. They would, in lieu of the property taxes that they would be exempt from. We need to know that the city is getting a good deal. I think we'll know a lot about the specifics. I would certainly demand that we'll know the specifics of that soon, but we don't yet know enough about that. There are many other outstanding questions as well. How much affordable housing if will be in the project? I'm pushing for more. What kind of mechanisms there'll be for local control, local input over the long term? Will there be things like a local development corporation to enable that? So there's a lot that we need to know, a lot more that I would need to know before I could be comfortable with the project. But I want to return by saying doing nothing at Penn Station is not an option. It's got to be addressed. Waiting another 5 or 10 years is not an option. This has to be done now, and that's something that a principle that I'll be returning to again and again and again in this discussion.
Next question is from Mary McCory. In the Upper West Side neighborhood, Fresh Direct occupies streets 24/7 using container trucks as their receiving and shipping center for the neighborhood deliveries. She doesn't believe they're paying rent for use of the streets and the commercial space. They're both a safety issue, blocking intersections, oncoming traffic, aesthetic, also running their generators 24/7. And she's inquired about this from previous council members without responses. Why does Fresh Direct have this privilege? What is your position on this preferential treatment? As they receive it, they're a detriment to the neighborhood grocers who pay significant rent for their stores and to the safety of the residents.
Well, it's not unique to Fresh Direct. We have had an explosion in home delivery. And let's be honest, it's driven by the fact that, New Yorkers have decided when they want a toothbrush, they want it delivered to their front door, preferably within a matter of hours. So let me start by saying I encourage everybody to continue to patronize your local merchants. And that's the way we can keep vital small businesses. But having said that, we have a problem on our streets. The explosion of delivery services has created a problem on our streets with double parking, with idling, which is an environmental issue. This is a safety issue, a congestion issue, a quality of life issue, and more. And we have been pushing forward a variety of policies that I think we need to address this. Congestion pricing, by the way, is one of them, because that will add a congestion charge for these vehicles that would, to some extent, rebalance the economics back in favor of storefronts. But we need much more than that. We have been exploring the idea of creating off-street hubs, for example, in parking garages, where the processing work can be done, which is right now being done on the street and on sidewalks. You see it. UPS just unrolls a mountain of boxes and does it on the sidewalk. No, they're not paying for that. And then they would deploy a fleet of bikes, human-powered or electric bikes, that would then cover the final delivery to the household, which would be far, far less damaging to our environment than all these diesel trucks, which are idling and double parking. So we're really looking at innovative policies to solve this. It's going to require some work. It might require some rezoning to allow for this in garage space, et cetera. But we got to solve this. We need a solution to this explosion of delivery services that really is a quality of life problem in our neighborhoods.
Our next question is from Robin and Bill Hubbard. The Times reports that the city is planning to cut down 1,000 trees on the Lower East Side as part of the storm protection project. How does this make sense?
Well, we are facing ever more dire extreme weather because of climate change. This is not a hypothetical. This is not a future prediction. This is now, it's almost a decade since Superstorm Sandy, in which Lower Manhattan flooded. We lost dozens of New Yorkers who died. Lower Manhattan is extremely vulnerable to the next storm, and there will be a next storm. And in particular, it's Black and brown communities along the waterfront and public housing in Lower Manhattan that is vulnerable. So we can't, the status quo there is not acceptable. We need to fix, we need to have better protection on the coastline. Now, the previous mayoral administration did something reprehensible, in my opinion. They spent years developing a plan with community input, partnering with the community that had community buy-in to create coastal protection. It would have also required hundreds of trees to be removed, but it had much more community buy-in. At the 11th and a half hour, the mayor yanked that plan out and put another one in, and that's really reprehensible. So the new plan is now underway, and I'm fighting hard to make sure that we do everything possible to minimize the time in which the parkland is left unusable by the neighborhood, minimize the negative impacts of construction, do everything we can to restore the canopy as soon as possible. So we have work to do to make sure this project is done right. And of course, I'm working to plant 1 million more trees citywide because I believe so much in this, in the Lower East Side and elsewhere. So big challenges on the Lower East Side and in Lower Manhattan, but we got to do it right, and it's something I'm very focused on.
One more question, and then we're going to bring up Matt Wald to ask a couple of questions. This is from Matt Walsh. You've been a proponent of expanded high-speed ferry service on the west side of Manhattan. As ridership increases in the ferry system, is there discussion about expanding service to the Upper West Side or Washington Heights?
Matt, a very, very important question. The city's ferry network largely ignores the western half of Manhattan, and the demand there is large and growing. We have ready-made ferry landings in place already along the west side, at 125th Street, at the West Harlem Piers, which are beautiful and being unused, at Dykeman Marina. And so we need north-south ferry service as part of the network. We also need cross-Hudson service. We're pushing for a route between West 125th Street and Weehawken. It's a 5 to 8 minute trip that would save you an hour crossing the Hudson on via automobile. So we're pushing very, very hard for ferry service on the west side. So thank you, Matt, for that question.
Thank you. And now Matt Wald will ask a handful of questions in the last 5 minutes that we have. Thank you everyone for their questions. And again, we'll submit your questions to the Borough President's office.
Thanks so much, Brian, and thanks for the terrific talk, Borough President Levine. Really so glad to have you at the law school, at least virtually and soon in person.
Thanks.
So you talked a little bit about your partnerships in some areas with the other borough presidents. We'd love to hear a little bit more about your relationships with the other borough presidents and with other city electeds, including the mayor.
Well, for I think maybe the first time ever, 4 of the 5 of us as borough presidents have we served together for 8 years in the city council. We all came in together in 2014. Talking about my friends Vanessa, Donovan, and Antonio. Vito served during a different era in the council, but the 4 of us for sure, and really the 5 of us have committed to work together wherever possible. And I think there's really powerful potential there. The 5 borough presidents together have real power. We all have joint appointments on the pension fund and on the city planning commission, and there's a lot of ways when the 5 borough presidents team up that it's a force, rhetorically and actually in the levers of policy. Our job is to fight for our boroughs and to support the mayor and partner with the mayor and partner with mayoral agencies as much as we can on behalf of our boroughs, but also that, we've got to push back when appropriate on behalf of our boroughs. And I don't think any of the 4 of us are afraid to do that. At the end of the day, my job is to fight for the 1.7 million people who live in Manhattan. And that means partnering with the mayor and the governor and the president whenever possible. But it means pushing back and calling out when I believe that there are failures in policy or problems. So it's a balance. But at the end of the day, what I love about this job is I'm entirely independent. And I respond to no one but the residents and voters of Manhattan. I have an independent budget that's established in the charter. My staffing and other resources are insulated from politics for that reason. And I have significant powers in the office, as you know, in legislation and appointments and land use in the budget and more. So honestly, I feel like I have one of the best jobs in New York City government, and feel very, very fortunate to be here at this time.
And we just have a couple minutes. I'll skip to my last question and ask it very quickly, which is, you're beginning this new chapter in public office as the borough president. When you get to the end of the first term and potentially a second term, when you look back 4 or 8 years from now, what are the things you hope to do? What's your vision for the next 4 or 8 years?
I appreciate that, Matt, because we all suffer from lurching from the daily crisis every day to whatever pops up the next day. And most of what we've talked about today are really short-term problems that we have to address. But we've thought a lot about the long-term multi-year plan for Manhattan and for this office. And we want to again and again and again return to 3 priorities. First, public health, to rebuild the hollowed out public health systems that made this city so vulnerable in this crisis. Equity, to address the profound inequity that has been so revealed and exacerbated over the past 2 years in health for sure, but also in housing and education and employment and criminal justice, and climate and resiliency that I've mentioned some. To make Manhattan the global leader in the race to carbon neutrality and to protect us from the climate change that's already here. These are the kinds of long-term goals that I've told my team we have to focus on every day, despite what's in the headlines. And it's not easy to do in government, but I hope that looking back after 4 years and if we're lucky beyond that, that we can say that we made progress on those large overarching priorities. That's what I'm holding us accountable for. So thank you for that question. And thank you, Matt, and to everyone for the opportunity today.
Well, let me thank you first for a really stimulating talk and for covering so many important issues for all of us. We welcome you to the job. I hope that you are happy in it and that you're working very hard on all those issues, because each one of them that you spoke about is important to people in Manhattan and to the city. We thank everybody who attended this breakfast. We look forward to seeing you again. We hope to have a breakfast during the summer, and we will certainly start in the fall, hopefully back at the law school in the Events Center. So thank you all very much for attending. This will end our 179th City Law breakfast.
Thanks so much, everybody.